Welcome to Bible Quizzes. There are 80 questions in this quiz. Are you ready? Let's begin. 1. Which prophet was instructed by God to marry a prostitute as a symbolic act? Isaiah, Hosea, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Hosea. Hosea 1 2 3. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." 2. What was the name of the poisonous plant that Jonah used for shade? Fig tree, olive tree, gourd plant, palm tree. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is gourd plant, Jonah 4:6. Then the Lord God provided a gourd and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort, and Jonah was very happy about the gourd. 3. Which unusual food did John the Baptist eat in the wilderness? Dates and honey, locusts and wild honey, figs and water, berries and root. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is locust and wild honey, Matthew 3:4. John's clothes were made of camel's hair and he had a leather belt around his waist. His food was locust and wild honey. 4. What was the name of the bitter water location Moses made sweet? Meribah, Mara, Massa, Elim. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Mara, Exodus 15:23. When they came to Mara, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. 5. Which king had a feast where a hand wrote on a wall? Darius, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Cyrus. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Belshazzar, Daniel 5:5. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. 6. What unique material was used to waterproof Noah's Ark? Olive oil, beeswax, clay, pitch. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is pitch, Genesis 6:14. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. 7. Which prophet was fed by ravens? Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Jeremiah. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Elijah, 1 Kings 17:6. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. 8. What was the weight of Goliath's spearhead? 15 pounds, 600 shekels, 500 shekels, 600 pounds. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 600 shekels, 1 Samuel 17:7. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. 9. Which animal spoke to Balaam? Eagle, lion, donkey, serpent. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is donkey, Numbers 22:28. Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" 10. What type of tree did Zacchaeus climb to see Jesus? Fig, olive, palm, sycamore. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is sycamore, Luke 19:4. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him since Jesus was coming that way. 11. How many stones did David collect before fighting Goliath? 4, 5, 6, 7. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 5. 1 Samuel 17:40. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. 12. What was the name of Moses' father-in-law? Jethro, Hobab, Ruel, Ragel. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Jethro, Exodus 3:1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. 13. How many years did the Israelites wander in the desert? 30, 40, 50, 55. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 40. Numbers 14:33. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. 14. What was the name of the garden where Jesus was arrested? Eden, Olives, Gethsemane, Tears. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Gethsemane, Matthew 26:36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." 15. Who was the first martyr of the Christian Church? James, Stephen, Peter, Paul. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Stephen, Acts 7:59-60. While they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Then he fell on his knees and cries out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." When he had said this, he fell asleep. 16. In which city was Jonah reluctant to preach? Nineveh, Babylon, Jerusalem, Tarsus. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Nineveh, Jonah 1:2. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. 17. What was the name of the city where Daniel was taken into exile? Jerusalem, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Babylon, Daniel 1:1-2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it, and the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. 18. What did King Hezekiah do after he received a letter from the king of Assyria? You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is, he spread the letter before the Lord in the temple and prayed. 2 Kings 19:14-15. And Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. Then Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, 19. Where was Jesus born? Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem, Capernaum. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Bethlehem, Matthew 2:1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. 20. Which city was Paul traveling to when he was converted? Rome, Jerusalem, Damascus, Antioch. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Damascus, Acts 9:3. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. 21. Where did Moses receive the Ten Commandments? Mount Carmel, Mount Sinai, Mount Zion, Mount Hermon. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Mount Sinai, Exodus 19:20. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. 22. How old was Noah when the flood came? 450 years, 600 years, 500 years, 400 years. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 600 years, Genesis 7:6. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth. 23. What was the name of Abraham's first wife? Rachel, Rebecca, Sarah, Leah. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Sarah, Genesis 17:15. God also said to Abraham, "As for Sarah your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah." 24. Which disciple denied Jesus 3 times? Andrew, Bartholomew, Peter, Thomas. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Peter, Luke 22:60-62. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. 25. Who was the strongest man in the Bible? David, Samson, Goliath, Saul. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Samson, Judges 16:28-30. Then Samson called to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." 26. What was Paul's occupation before becoming an apostle? Farmer, fisherman, carpenter, tent maker. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is tent maker, Acts 18:3, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. 27. What did God provide for the Israelites to eat in the desert? Manna, quail, wine, dates. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is manna, Exodus 16:15. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat." 28. What did Esau sell his birthright for? Silver, land, lentil stew, sheep. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is lentil stew, Genesis 25:34. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left, so Esau despised his birthright. 29. What happened to Lot's wife when she looked back? You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is she turned into a pillar of salt, Genesis 19:26. But Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. 30. How many people did Jesus feed with 5 loaves and 2 fish? 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, 10,000. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 5,000. Matthew 14:21. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. 31. How many talents of gold did Solomon receive yearly? 300, 450, 666, 500. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 666. 1 Kings 10:14. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. 32. How many times did Naaman dip in the Jordan River to be healed? 3 times, 5 times, 7 times, 10 times. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 7 times, 2 Kings 5:14. So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. 33. What was used to mark Hebrew doorposts during Passover? Olive oil, lamb's blood, red cloth, cedar wood. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is lamb's blood, Exodus 12:7. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the doorframes of the houses where they eat the lambs. 34. What material was the Ark of the Covenant made from? Bronze, iron, acacia wood, cedar. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is acacia wood, Exodus 25:10. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. 35. What did David use to kill Goliath? Sword, sling and stone, bow and arrow, spear. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is sling and stone, 1 Samuel 17:50. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. 36. What language was most of the Old Testament originally written in? Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Hebrew, historical context, noting that parts of Daniel and Ezra were written in Aramaic, but Hebrew was the primary language. 37. Which prophet was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind? Elisha, Elijah, Isaiah, Ezekiel. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Elijah, 2 Kings 2:11. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. 38. Who was swallowed by a great fish? Daniel, Isaiah, Peter, Jonah. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Jonah, Jonah 1:17. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. 39. What test did Gideon use to select his army? How they ate dates, how they drank juice, how they drank wine, how they drank water. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is how they drank water, Judges 7:5-6. So Gideon took the people down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 40. What did Daniel refuse to eat in the king's court? sacrificed meat, royal food, fish, bread. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is royal food, Daniel 1:8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. 41. What physical condition did Jacob have after wrestling with God? Blindness, deafness, weakness, limp. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is limp. Genesis 32:25. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. 42. Who defeated the walls of Jericho? David, Samson, Joshua, Gideon. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Joshua, Joshua 6:20. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the man gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. 43. How many men did Gideon initially gather for battle? 10,000, 32,000, 5,000, 15,000. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 32,000. Judges 7:3. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. 44. Who was Ruth's mother-in-law? Sarah, Naomi, Rachel, Leah. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Naomi, Ruth 1:4. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. 45. What strange thing happened when Peter was in prison? You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is, an angel freed him. Acts 12:7. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. 46. How was Jesus related to John the Baptist? Cousins, second cousins, siblings, no relations. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is second cousins. Luke 1:36. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. 47. How tall was Goliath? 6 feet, 6 cubits and a span, 8 cubits and a span, 7 feet, 7 inches. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 6 cubits and a span. 1 Samuel 17:4. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. 48. How many pieces of silver did Judas receive for betraying Jesus? 30, 40, 50, 60. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 30, Matthew 26:15, and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. 49. What was Matthew's occupation before becoming a disciple? Fisherman, tax collector, carpenter, shepherd. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is tax collector, Matthew 9:9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. 50. What was Luke's profession? Fisherman, carpenter, physician, tent maker. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is physician, Colossians 4:14. Our dear friend Luke the doctor and Demas send greetings. 51. How old was Sarah when she gave birth to Isaac? 60, 70, 75, 90. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 90. Genesis 17:17. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old, and will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? 52. What unusual method did Ehud use to kill a king? Sword, bent arrow, hidden dagger, poison. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is hidden dagger, Judges 3:21-22. Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the dagger from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. 53. Who interpreted Pharaoh's dream about fat and thin cows? Moses, Joseph, Daniel, Samuel. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Joseph, Genesis 41:25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. 54. What did Daniel's vision of four beasts represent? You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is four different beasts representing kingdoms. Daniel 7:3. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. 55. What city was Paul shipwrecked near? Alexandria, Athens, Malta, Cyprus. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Malta, Acts 28:1. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. 56. Who went from being a persecutor to an apostle? Peter, John, Paul, Timothy. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Paul, Acts 9:1-6. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. Suddenly, a light from heaven flashed around him. 57. What did God use to provide water for Israelites? Rain, rock, wood, wind. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is rock, Exodus 17:6. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. 58. What strange thing did Ezekiel add to his bread? Locusts, fish, human waste, roots. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is human waste, Ezekiel 4:12. Eat the food as you would a bar of barley bread. Bake it in the sight of the people using human excrement for fuel. 59. What did Samson use to defeat 1,000 Philistines? Sword, spear, sling, jawbone. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is jawbone, Judges 15:15. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. 60. How did Gideon test God's promise? With fire, with a fleece, with water, with bread. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is with a fleece. Judges 6:37. Look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. 61. How tall was a giant og's bed? 9 feet, 13 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 13 feet. Deuteronomy 3:11. Only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaites. His bed was decorated with iron and was more than 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, according to the standard of the Sidonian cubit. 62. Who was the first metal worker mentioned in the Bible? David, Tubal-Cain, Bezalel, Solomon. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Tubal-Cain, Genesis 4:22. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. 63. What was the name of the place where Jacob wrestled with God? Bethel, Peniel, Jabbok, Sinai. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Peniel, Genesis 32:30. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." 64. Where did Paul preach from a prison cell? Rome, Philippi, Jerusalem, Caesarea. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Philippi, Acts 16:25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. 65. What happened to King Herod for not giving God glory? Struck blind, eaten by worms, turned to stone, struck mute. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is eaten by worms, Acts 12:23. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down and he was eaten by worms and died. 66. What unusual punishment did God give Uzziah? Blindness, muteness, leprosy, paralysis. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is leprosy, 2 Chronicles 26:19. Uzziah, who had a censer in his hand ready to burn incense, became angry. While he was raging at the priests in the presence before the incense altar in the Lord's temple, leprosy broke out on his forehead. 67. Which animals did God send as a plague on the Egyptians? Scorpions, frogs, ravens, lions. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is frogs, Exodus 8:6. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. 68. What animal represents Jesus in the New Testament? Lion, eagle, lamb, dove. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is lamb, John 1:29. The next day, John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, "Look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." 69. What animal did God compare the people of Israel to when they were rebellious? Goats, foxes, sheep, eagles. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is sheep. Isaiah 53:6. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. 70. Who was the youngest person to become a king in the Bible? Joash, Solomon, Josiah, Jude. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Joash, 2 Kings 11:21. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. 71. Who was the longest reigning king in Israel? Solomon, David, Jeroboam II, Joash. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Jeroboam II, 2 Kings 14:23. In the 50th year of Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel, became king in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. 72. What was the name of the son of Solomon who rebelled against him? Jeroboam, Rehoboam, Abijah, Judith. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Jeroboam, 1 Kings 11:26. Also, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. He was one of Solomon's officials, an Ephraimite from Zereda, and his mother was a widow named Zeruiah. 73. Which of these books is not considered part of the Apocrypha? Esther, Tobit, Judith, Baruch. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Esther. Esther is part of the Hebrew Bible and Protestant Old Testament. 74. What was the name of the pool in Jerusalem where Jesus healed a blind man? Siloam, Gibeon, Bethesda. Unnamed. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Siloam, John 9:7. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the men went and washed and came home seeing. 75. Who was the mother of Ishmael? Hagar. 75. Who was the mother of Ishmael? Hagar, Agag, Sarah, Hannah. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Hagar. Genesis 16:1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. 76. Where was Joseph sold into slavery? Canaan, Egypt, Midian, Jerusalem. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Egypt, Genesis 37:28. Then Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. 77. Who was Joseph sold to in Egypt? Pharaoh, Levi, Potiphar, Potipharah. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Potiphar, Genesis 39:1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. 78. How old was Moses when he died? 100 years, 140 years, 120 years, 170 years. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is 120 years. Deuteronomy 34:7. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak nor his strength gone. 79. Which apostle became known as the rock of the church? Peter, James, John, Asahel. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Peter, Matthew 16:18. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. 80. Who was the Israelite who stole consecrated items during the conquest of Jericho? Goliath, Balaam, Akan, Huldah. You have 10 seconds to answer. The answer is Achan, Joshua 7:1. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. And there you have it. How well did you do? Tally your score and post in the comments. And don't forget to share this quiz with your family and friends. See you in the next one. God bless.